Chapter 3: Morning Light. When the morning came, it felt strange in that cabin. The sunlight bled pale and watery through the curtains, a light that should have been comforting but wasn't. Daniel sat up on the couch, every bone aching from a night of half-sleep. His blanket had twisted around his legs, his head thick with exhaustion. He couldn't remember if he'd ever truly drifted off. The scraping sound still echoed in his mind. He rubbed his face, trying to shake it off. Maybe it had been nothing. A branch against the glass, a trick of an old house groaning in the wind. That was the explanation he kept turning over in his mind, but when he thought of Lily's whisper, "They're coming closer," the words stuck like splinters. Upstairs, footsteps moved. The faint creak of boards, a door shutting, it's just the normal sounds, domestic. They grounded him enough to stand and make his way into the kitchen. Dad was already at the table, a mug of coffee in hand. His hair stood wild, his shirt wrinkled, and his eyes looked bleary. "Didn't sleep worth a damn, son," he muttered, though whether it was to Daniel or himself was unclear. "Me neither," Daniel admitted, pulling open a cupboard. Dust rained down. Inside were mismatched plates and mugs, old as the cabin itself. He grabbed one, filled it with coffee, and sat across from his father. Dad studied him for a moment. "You kept tossing last night, couch too short," something like that. He wanted to mention the sound, to say there's been something at Lily's window, but the words stuck in his throat. His father wouldn't believe him, would chalk it up to nerves or imagination or the weight of driving through a dark forest after a long day. Mom came in then, her arms full of folded towels. She must have found them upstairs. "The place needs a good cleaning," she said, her voice chipper, as if sheer brightness might scrub away the cabin's gloom. "But it'll do for a weekend. Once we air it out, it'll feel homier." She smiled at Daniel, and for a moment he almost believed her, almost. Then Lily padded in. She was barefoot, hair tangled, her rabbit dangling from one hand. Her eyes looked too big for her small face, and she didn't blink as she slid into a chair. "Did you sleep okay, little bug?" Daniel asked softly. She shook her head. "They were at the window." Daniel's chest went cold. Dad sighed, lowering his mug with a loud clink. "Lily, enough with the stories. It was just trees and shadows. You've got an imagination, that's all." But Lily didn't flinch. She just looked at Daniel as though she knew he'd heard it too. The morning stretched slowly. They unpacked what little they had, aired out the musty rooms, and wiped down surfaces yellowed with dust. Mom hung sheets on the porch railing, humming under her breath, her voice carrying into the trees. Daniel carried boxes from the roof rack upstairs, moving through the narrow hall that smelled faintly of mold. When he stepped into Lily's room, he froze. The curtains were pulled tight, but on the inside of the glass was a smudge. Not a handprint, not exactly, but a smear in the dust that trailed across the pane. It was thin, deliberate, and high for Lily to have reached. Something had touched the window. He stood there long, staring at it, his heart pounding in his ears, until Lily appeared in the doorway. "They don't like the sun and light," she said matter-of-factually. His mouth went dry. "Lily, did you see anything?" She hugged her rabbit tighter. "Yes, they stood just there looking in my direction." With a chill going down his spine, Daniel just stood there looking at the window where they were standing and looking at his sister. At lunch, Mom announced they'd take a walk down to the lake after eating. "It's not far," she said. Her tone was brisk and insistent. "A little fresh air will do us good." Dad agreed with a nod. Daniel kept silent. He didn't want to go near the trees again, not so soon, but he didn't argue. The forest in daylight was different, less like a trap and more like a maze. Shafts of sunlight pierced the canopy, catching on spider webs that were strung between branches. The air smelled of damp moss and pine needles, but Daniel couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every time he turned, he caught glimpses of movement at the edges of his vision. A branch swaying when there was no wind, a shadow shifting when the light hadn't changed. Lily walked close at his side, her small hand gripping his. She didn't skip or sing the way she usually did on trails. She was silent, her eyes always on the spaces between the trees. When they reached the lake, Mom spread a blanket on the grass and sighed with relief. Dad tossed stones into the water, watching the ripples. Daniel sat with Lily, the silence between them heavy. She leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear. "I think they are afraid of water," she whispered. He looked at her sharply. "What do you mean?" Her gaze stayed fixed on the tree line. They all stood over there and not near as. Daniel followed her stare. Across the water, the trees loomed. and in the shadows beneath their branches, something darker lingered. Tall, thin shapes looking as if they were staring at them. It must be their imagination. This can't be true.